the threat from terrorist attack is something that nobody has to live with, and that's why response and self-defense is fully permissible, justified if it can demonstrate the background for this attack in its own self-defense to use military force. It ought to be subject to negotiation between India and Pakistan. I'm not suggesting the U.S. get involved in it. I'm not sure either side would want that to happen in any event. But ultimately, these political questions ought to be addressed by political means and not through terrorism. This is one of a string of terrorist attacks in Kashmir over recent years, and it's obviously a tragedy for the victims and for the people in Kashmir generally that they can't live in a stable environment. That tourists are deterred from coming because of terrorist activity like this. I think it's very important to continue the work to find exactly what the circumstances of this were, but when I was National Security Advisor, we faced a comparable situation in 2019 with a terrorist attack that emanated from Pakistani soil, and we consulted closely with senior government officials. I spoke in Foreign Secretary of State Mike Pompeo spoke with Ajit Doval, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor. And our view at the time was that if the government felt that they were confident that this had emanated from Pakistani soil and that the government of Pakistan had failed to prevent the attack from taking place or had actually assisted it, that India had every right to act in self-defense. And I think the same principle applies here. I do think it's in India's interest to be able to demonstrate as convincingly as possible what the circumstances were to justify a military response, if that's what they decide to do. Nobody wants to see a wider conflict in South Asia, but the threat from terrorist attack is something that nobody has to live with, and that's why response and self-defense is fully permissible. Well, the United States has been dealing with the question of Pakistan for quite some time and in very difficult circumstances over a long period of time, especially in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And we have said in both Republican and Democratic administrations that state sponsorship of terrorism is not something we can accept, and that the terrorist activities that come from Pakistani territory ultimately are going to find themselves attributed to the government if they don't take action against them. It's a difficult process, but I am concerned both about the potential threat from terrorist groups inside Pakistan or across the border in Afghanistan. I'm also concerned about the growing influence that China has over the government of Pakistan, which really is a threat to peace and security in that region. So there's a lot at stake here, and I think that the U.S. role should be to cooperate closely with India, as we have in the past, on counterterrorism measures, and perhaps cooperate more closely, and to continue to talk to the government of Pakistan about why this situation needs to come to an acceptable conclusion. Well, I think if their activity warrants it, they should be. The United States has never hesitated to do that. I think in this case, it's more a question of the Pakistani government not exercising effective control over its own territory, which is a legitimate reason for India to act militarily if it so decides, and also a way to limit possible escalation, because it would not be considered an attack on Pakistan itself, but on lawless groups in their territory. I think this terrorist problem is growing more acute. I mean, obviously, in the context of Kashmir, it's been a serious issue since partition, and other terrorist attacks that India has endured in more recent years across the country. So it's one reason why I think U.S.-Indian cooperation on counterterrorism activities has been amply justified in the past, and certainly could benefit from more extensive cooperation. Well, I think this is the kind of thing we have talked to the Pakistanis about for many, many years. Obviously, the government of India has done the same, and it's the lack of success is frustrating, obviously, and I think that's why India is justified, if it can demonstrate the background for this attack in its own self-defense, to use military force. It ought to be subject to negotiation between India and Pakistan. I'm not suggesting the U.S. get involved in it. I'm not sure either side would want that to happen in any event. But ultimately, these political questions ought to be addressed by political means and not through terrorism. Well, I think we're still very interested for eminently good reasons. Just speaking of Afghanistan, even the Biden administration testified in open congressional hearings that the return of foreign terrorist fighters to Afghanistan probably meant that ISIS-K and perhaps Al-Qaeda by this point could once again mount terrorist attacks around the world, planned and based in Afghanistan. So that terrorist threat, unfortunately, since our withdrawal, has returned. But of course, the bigger problem is China, which I think continues to pursue a policy of hegemony all along its Indo-Pacific periphery, and in the disputed areas all along the line of actual control between China and India, but particularly up near Kashmir. It's a very delicate situation that we've seen a lot of Chinese provocations over the years. I am, as I said a moment ago, I'm very worried about increased Chinese influence on Pakistan. I don't think that's in the U.S. interest or India's interest or the interest of peace and security in South Asia, and yet that continues to happen. And having that in mind, as well as dealing with the threat of terrorist attacks emanating from Pakistani territory, are very important priorities for the United States. Well, I think it'll be a very considered response. I don't think either man is going to react without carefully thinking through the implications of it and what they think they need to do to act in India's self-defense. I have confidence, as in the case in 2019, that they will be strongly protective of India and its citizens and all the rights that they have as a sovereign power. But will not do so in a way that can't be fully justified. Well, I think the second Trump term is just about as chaotic as the first Trump term was in national security decision making. He's with Waltz's removal, he's now had 5 national security advisors in less than 4.5 years in office. I just will say for the record, I am his longest serving national security advisor. I may not have that title at the end of the second term, but it's untenable to have the kind of job turnover, whether by resignation or otherwise, that we saw during the first term. You can't have a stable decision-making team if people keep leaving. So Waltz will go on, presumably, to be nominated to be ambassador to the UN, which is another job I've had. It's a nice job. It's not like being national security advisor, but I think he was given a soft landing. I think it's unsustainable for very long to have Secretary of State Marco Rubio also be national security advisor. So for Trump's own benefit, he ought to name I won't say a permanent replacement, but a full-time replacement for Waltz as soon as he can. Well, I think he accomplished some things domestically, but I think internationally there were a series of mistakes and failures in Ukraine. I think we're mistaken now to be negotiating with Iran over their nuclear weapons program, which I don't think the Ayatollahs have any intention whatever of giving up. And I think the entire plan of tariffs is going to be very unhelpful and perhaps lead to real economic difficulties for everybody involved in it. Well, I think from the U.S. perspective, the bilateral relationship with India is probably the most important one we have in this century, given the nature of the threats we face around the world. I think it is an advantage that Trump and Modi have a good personal relationship. But I think there's a lot of work to do on political issues, on military issues to try and draw closer together. And that is made more difficult by trade disputes. So I wouldn't have launched this trade war with every country in the world. I think the principal bad actor is China. I think we've all been harmed by Chinese practices like stealing intellectual property and subsidizing their companies in competition with ours and not really opening their domestic market as they promised to do. That's obviously not the way Trump is proceeding, but that is still the biggest problem.